Welcome to Hot Topics. We're going to do a video today on terminations and markings on equipment pertaining to terminations. Uh, we did a little video basically speaking about terminals and markings of equipment and so forth. And we've had some requests. Could we talk a little bit more about what I meant by 60-degree C terminals, 60/75-degree terminals, and 75-degree terminals, and exactly how would what would I go in the code to pick this up, and just basically do a video on it. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to be talking about 110.14 C as in car 1. Now, if you have your code book handy, now one thing Billy told me that I wasn't aware of is if you guys have the first printing of the code out there, you folks, your page numbers will be maybe a couple pages off, when they made corrections in the NEC, and these pages may move forward a little bit. Keep that in mind if you happen to look up a page number and you're off a couple pages. It's because they have corrected anything in the code that needed corrections, and it threw the pages off a little bit from the first printing. So if you will, kind of keep that in mind. And now, if you will, let's turn over to 110.14 on page 47 and 48 of the first printing of the code. And if you will, let's just turn to page 48, if you will. And on the left-hand side of the page at the very top, we pick up 110.14a that talks about the terminals themselves. And if you look at 110.14b, we're dealing with splices. It could be say a handy box, a square box, an octagon box, or whatever may be in the run, and there's a splice being made, maybe, see. But we're going to focus on 110.14c there on the left-hand side of the page. Now, when I was talking about the 90-degree column did not exist until you derate, well, here it is. If you look at 110.14c as in car, title head, temperature limitations, I'm not going to read it all, but just let's focus on the last sentence of that paragraph, and it reads, conductors with temperature ratings higher than specified for terminals shall be permitted to be used for ampacities of adjustment, correction, or both. And we did an illustration and a calculation for a feeder using both D rates, but notice we did away in the code the triple D rate. We no longer have that on our backs anymore, where conductors would be so large, in many cases you couldn't even terminate them. Now, I like to, if you will with me, I have a section that kind of explains this more to the user of the code, especially a beginner, and that's 334.80. 334.80. Now, if you will, let's go over to about page 200, and give me a second here. And on page 200, or your code book, look at 334.80 on the left-hand side of the page, down almost to the middle of the column, and we have 334.80. And it's talking about non-metallic sheath cable, Romex, rope, whatever you want to call it. But we also, it's the same rule for AC cable and MC cable if they're not specially marked for giving you a different terminal rating. But notice the ampacity of the types of NM, NMC cable shall be determined in accordance with 310.14. The ampacity shall not exceed that. of 60 degrees C. Now that's the section that says cables, and when you search it out, AC cable, MC cable, all cables except service entrance cable are 60 degrees C, as you see there. And then notice the next sentence says it all. It ties it back to 110.14 C1. And notice what it says there. The 90 degree C rating shall be permitted to be used for the ampacity adjustment or correction calculations. But notice the big provided. Provided the final calculation ampacity does not exceed that at 60 degrees C. Pretty well grouping all your cables when you start searching through the 300 series, that they're 60 degrees C unless specially marked. So we kind of picked that up, but notice it spells it out in more detailed wording that 90 degrees C is only used really for derating and reducing the ampacity of a conductor back to 60 degrees C if it's a cable, 75 degrees C if these terminals are marked that way. Now, with that information, we go back to 110.14 C1 little a. And then notice there, I'm going to save us a little time here. I'll just paraphrase it. That we're talking about conductors number 14 through number 1. And it says they shall be 60 degrees C. That'd be A1. A2, then we could use a higher ampacity conductor along with 3. Then that's 90 degrees C. If it's in a location where the 90 degrees C could be used, or in wet locations, it'd be automatically a 75 degree column. Now, you can pick this up. We won't turn to it, but you can pick this information up in 310.6 and 310.10. Look at those two sections. I'll say it again, 310.6 and 310.10. And folks, if you forget all these section numbers and references, you're going to get them there. Those sections will point you in the right direction along with this 110.14 C1. So notice, if the device is 100 amps or less and the equipment 100 amps or less, this says you're 60 degrees C. Without, you can buy equipment that has 60/75. Now, we picked this information up in 310.16, which we looked at and reviewed in another video. But let's look at this illustration with a title head, All Conductors are THHN copper and running conduit. Now let's look at the circuit number 1. First thing we want to do is see what type of circuit breaker marking we have. And you look at it and you say, well, it's 60 degrees C. In other words, it's going to be a 60 degrees C terminal, period. You can't cable it at more than 60 degree ampacities and table 310.16. And it says, and let's just say it's 100 amps here. And you're 60 degrees C, and then you roll over here and look at the equipment, and it's 60 degrees C. So this whole circuit, number 1, 60 degrees C. So you say, well, I need 100 amps. Well, now when we go over to page 161 in the first printing, and you look at your table 310.16, it would take a number, probably number 3 in the 75 degree column, and then you would need a number 1 in the 60 degree column. You see the difference? At 60 degrees C, you need a number 1 to cable that equipment and connect it to that breaker with 60 degrees C. Now you say, well, now, wait a minute. I'm looking at the note 2 here below, and if you look at the third line down, 60/75 degrees C. And the equipment 75 degrees C. Your breaker's 60/75. Then you could cable it and conduit here, see, at 75 degrees C. Now when you go to your table 310.16, you just need a number 3, good for 100 amps. You see that? And that's why in 110.14C1 little a, it says number 14 through number 1. Because you need a number 1, I believe it's 110 amps in the table, 310.16. That 110 amps to cable this because of the 60-degree terminals. So you have to review that as an electrician and then know, basically what you're doing there. And that's why it says conductors number 14 through number 1 here, see. Now, if we look at the next circuit here, number 2, you're looking at your terminals, you're over 100 amps, so they're automatically 75 degrees C. You have 75 degrees C here, so you can cable this at a 75 degrees C, but notice your conductors have to be larger than number 1. And if the authority having jurisdiction does not allow you to use, say, a number 1, you would have to use a 1/0 or larger because of the rule of 110.14C1 little b, where the rating of the equipment is over 100 amps, we automatically have 75 degrees C terminals, see. Now let's jump on the circuit number 3. Looking at the overcurrent device, there's 75 degrees C. You come over to the equipment and say, uh-oh, we only have 60 degree C terminals. Or you'd have to get a hold of equipment that's 75 degrees C, or you're stuck with 60 degrees C ampacities here. So when you look at that number 3 conductor, for example, you would see in the 60 degree column 110, and in the 75 degree column 100, and you couldn't use a 90 degrees C except a D rate. And that's what we're calling out. So in your note 1 below there, notice the terminals are not all 75 degrees C, so 60 degree ampacities from table 310.16 shall be used, and I believe that's around page 161 of your code book. Now, the note number 2 then tells you for 100 amps or less, they're automatically 60 degrees C if they're not marked 60/75 or 75 degree column. So as we pointed out, this section to me is basically saying that if you're 100 amp or less overcurrent protective device and equipment, you're 60 degrees C without you have the 60/75, which means you can cable at 60, or you could run it the circuit and conduit and pull conductors if you had the marking of 75 degrees C the entire run. So you have to really review 110.14A, B, and C and be familiar with the requirements of those sections. Now, this is figure 8-4 from Stallcup's Electrical Design Book, Volume 1. Now, looking at still Stallcup's Electrical Design Book, Volume 1, we're going to take a look, I believe it's figure 8-13. And notice again, you're checking this thing out. If you look at the, it's 100 amps or less, if you look at circuit 1, and if you go over here, you have 75 degrees C, so that's a 60 degree circuit, see. Checking your equipment. Here, if you want to check the equipment, 75 degree, you come back here. It's over 100 amps, 75 degrees C. How I'm in business. I can cable at 75 degrees C. Now, the circuit 3, again, I'm starting at, it doesn't matter. You start at the equipment or at the breaker. It doesn't make any difference. And at the breaker, we have 75 degrees C. We go over here, 75 degrees C. So that means, see, we can run that in conduit and pull conductors to it or use service entrance cable, but I couldn't use Romex here. Non-metallic sheath cable, AC cable, MC cable, that it was a marking of 75, but I could use service entrance cable because they're identified with 75 degrees C. So applying this, the note, it says if the terminals are not all 75 degrees C in a circuit, 60 degree ampacities in table 310.16 should be used. So that's where you have, they're not all 75, you have some 60 degree C terminals. And then we have a question here in the boxed in information. What size conductors in overcurrent device are required for a circuit number 1? So you look at circuit number 1 and you're going to see what are the terminals. 75 at the equipment, but at the panel I have 60 degrees C. So I'd come down and say, all right, now I go to table 310.16, about page 161 in the code, first printing, and you'd say number 6, 55 amps, doesn't exist, 90 degree column. So you'd slide down here and you'd say, well, now 240.4b is in boy, along with table 240.6a and 110.14c1 terminals, terminations, 55 degree, a 55 amp conductor at 50 or 60 on an overcurrent protection device. So up here you're going to have to cable it, see, at 60. So the solution would be the minimum size overcurrent protection device is 50 amps and the size conductors are number 6, but I'm cabling it at 60 degrees C. And when you put these two illustrations together, that's about the best I think we could probably explain it, along with the code sections to back up what you see in the two illustrations. So I hope that kind of explains that a little bit more. And I was told by 2 or 3 phone calls that I didn't go in depth enough on terminations, whether it's 60/75 or 75. And I think now maybe this will satisfy the need of you folks out there that want a little bit more information. And so that's what this video is illustrating to you, is how we would connect conductors to terminals based upon terminal ratings and loads of 100 amps or less, or over 100 amps.